Prologue of Midnight Axtian Pact, which is book 1 of the Axtian trilogy. Nox Suava, Silesian Court, 16 years ago. The stench of death clung to me like a second skin. The air was ripe with despair, tragedy, and fear so thick I could almost taste it in my mouth. Wails and moans of the ones who had lost their loved ones and the soon-to-be dead filled the silence as I raced by. The blood and gore coating my teeth tasted like copper. It soaked my obsidian fur, giving it a red hue, and itching uncontrollably as it started to dry in patches. When I couldn't stomach the carnage any longer, the wolf spirit I shared my body and mind with shielded me and I transformed into a glorious wolf. His name is Midnight, and when we're in his form, he's at least 4 times the size of a normal wolf and easily twice the size of other wolf shifters. Striking with his silvery black pelt, Midnight would not hesitate to rip out anyone's throat if we were threatened. He is a fierce protector of his family and friends and has been with me since I was born. Most shifters get their spirit when they are born, but on rare occasions a pup or child may not find theirs at all. Most of the time they do develop them later on, but neither mattered as each was important to us in our way of life. Each child or pup that was born was another person to carry on our lineage. Every shifter is a blessing. There are many variations of shifters, from wolves to bears, although they were mostly eradicated during the war, leaving only a few random loners to wander the countryside. Regardless of whether a shifter actually changes form, they all possess certain traits such as enhanced senses and strength. It all had something to do with genetics. I knew that the average alpha had thicker skin and wolf pelts than their pack members, as they were almost always seen on the front lines. The alpha of the Blood and Moon pack, my alpha, Sterling, might have been in charge and able to dish out punishment when he saw fit, but only if he felt it was needed. It was always a fair and just way to treat us and everyone, from our omegas to our humans. This meant that Alpha Sterling didn't look down on someone just because they were of a lower rank than himself. He understood that all his members had their place within the pack, ensuring they ran like well-oiled machines. But even with Midnight's protection, I still wanted to vomit and shower until I was raw. I wasn't sure how many skirmishes I could handle. At only 16, this was the 5th one I had fought in over the last year, and it was the worst one by far. So many bodies, so much destruction. I can't do this, I spoke to Midnight through our mind link. We shifters had the ability to communicate with their spirits through a link in our minds, it's like a doorway. When it's open, we allow ourselves to be taken over and we become the animal. Midnight is a wolf, so therefore I become a wolf. We are 2 separate beings, each with our own thoughts and feelings, sharing the same existence. Midnight's reply came out as a snarl. I know we've been in many fights previously. This is unlike anything you have witnessed before. But if we do not fight now, who is going to put an end to this? We do this to protect all the innocent people, human and paranormal races alike, from falling victim to their cruel ways. If we don't, they'll kill many more innocent men, women, and children. We will make them pay. We have to. Who are you talking about? Do you know who did this? The Alpha didn't say anything about who it was, I added quickly. I've faced these guys before. Ever heard of the Circle? That made me stumble to a stop. Aren't they just a bedtime story? Why would they be here? I replied as oily dread spread through my gut at the name. Midnight's dark chuckle rang through my head. No, they are real, and this is only a small display of their power. As long as the Circle is still lurking around, we will have to go through many more attacks like it, possibly even another war. How do you know this? And why don't I know about this if you do? I asked as we started to run again. You might be my human now, but this isn't the first time I've existed, Midnight said roughly. He never did like talking about his past. What do you mean? I am an old soul and I have been around since the war. I wondered if he was talking about the Battle of Wings, a fierce war that broke out between an unknown player and the paranormal world. It resulted in many casualties, with some even going extinct. Turns out that specific player was a demon who wanted to rule the world, using his children as shields while he sat back and watched. Him and his cronies soon got a name for themselves. Midnight had followed my train of thought. Yes, they named themselves the Circle, and we thought they had been wiped out, but clearly they haven't. Now we must defend ourselves once again. This is why we are doing this. This is what we have to protect. But how do we even know that it's the Circle? Wouldn't they be operating under the king of all demon shifters? I asked, even if Midnight was right. No one had heard from that king in a few years now. He was shrouded in mystery. No one even knew if he still existed. I had heard whispers about the group and how power-hungry they were. I thought they were old wives' tales, used to keep pups in line and in bed at night. I distantly recall my mother telling me what I thought to be wild stories whenever I misbehaved. Rumour was that the Circle was notorious for being a large, ruthless, and bloodthirsty group comprised of fallen war generals and exiled nobles, hell-bent on world domination. That sort of thinking caught the attention of a lot of strong paranormal creatures who were unhappy with the way of things. They had plenty of followers and supporters. What was more disturbing was what they were known to do to their victims. I had heard many tales, and the idea of it alone was truly horrific. Midnight did not deign to reply, which I found odd, but I couldn't let those thoughts impact my mission. Getting to the Silesian mansion and rescuing the king, queen, and their daughter. I was one of the fastest and strongest warriors, but becoming a top warrior wolf wasn't an easy feat though. I had to attend multiple tests on strategy, warfare, and training 7 days a week, both in wolf form and human, practicing when to use teeth and claws and when to use human weapons. Alpha Sterling even helped me to learn what foods to eat to help boost my energy and stamina. What I lacked in experience or bulk, I made up for with fresh ideas and careful strategizing. Along with bloody hard work and dedication, and the Alpha seemed pleased, almost proud with each fight I won. Each of my strategies so far had succeeded in securing us a win with the smallest amount of casualties. Over the last few years, I have had to fight my way to the top, continuously beating the outer warriors in order to prove myself. I did it over and over again from when I was 9 years old until I had their respect. As we moved through the sea of dead bodies and small bands of scouting wolves and vampires working together, it reminded me that we hadn't heard back from the last scouting troop we'd sent out ahead of us a couple of weeks ago. We had been monitoring Silesia more closely for the past 6 months after what happened when Grayson Dagon and I had taken the newbies out on a rescue mission. I shuddered, blocking out those horrific memories. Do you think, if we are late, that Alpha Sterling might worry that he's lost another top beta warrior? I mused. Then he'd be underestimating you, don't you think? You're as strong as an Alpha. I wouldn't be surprised to find out you are one. I snorted at the ridiculous notion. Alphas are chosen based on their abilities rather than their bloodline, although quite often the sons of Alphas would follow in their father's footsteps. Most Alphas had a quiet confidence and self-assurance that I often lacked. They had the ability to keep everyone in line, while I couldn't stop my trainees from squabbling. Alpha Sterling always did his best for our pack and his sub-packs. I was yet to make Alpha Sterling submit to me while training with him in a fight. He was too powerful, but always made sure to tell me what I was doing wrong and give me pointers. Look, I'm sure the scouting party is fine. Just focus on your task at hand, Midnight growled, bringing my thoughts back to our current conversation. We remained silent as we continued onwards, and my thoughts returned to what Midnight had said. I still had worked my ass off to become the youngest top warrior in my class. It was through pure hard work that I had slowly gained Alpha Sterling's respect and trust. My strength had nothing to do with being an Alpha, I was sure of it. Because as far as I was aware, the only way you could become an Alpha, if you were born one, was either to kill the previous Alpha or have the Alpha submit and step down. And that rarely happened. Alphas were generally considered to be more aggressive and dominant, than any other wolves, although most of the male shifters are dominant and aggressive when it comes to protecting their mates and pups or offspring. All Alphas also had a specific voice for when they'd be issuing commands or making a member of the pack submit or make them fall in line. This worked on almost all species, which was exceptionally helpful in commanding armies of mixed ranked species. The only type of shifter or human it didn't work on were other Alphas and hybrids. That's because hybrids had the ability to use both parents' powers. So, the stronger the parent, the stronger the hybrid offspring would be. Of course, not all offspring were born with hybrid powers, some being born powerless. They are extremely rare, and there are so few that the Alphas were not threatened by them. As much as I didn't want to fight, I couldn't turn my back on innocent people. People the demons would only possess, which was a heinous act. Women would be kept as slaves for the demonic hordes, and their children would wind up as cannon fodder, murdered in cold blood just for some sick man who wanted total control over the world. I drifted through the door, the connection point between midnight and my consciousness, in the back of our mind, giving him the reins as we continued to race past some more of the mutilated bodies. I was allowing him to control most of our movements. He always loved when I shifted, shedding our human form and allowing him to run wild. Unfortunately, we were running for our lives and not going for a simple jaunt in the forest. This forest was not safe. Demons still lurked in the shadows. Everywhere I looked, there were bodies or body parts, pieces of what was left of the wolves, vampires, and any other poor, unfortunate soul caught in the crossfire. I had to take back control over our movements as we approached our rendezvous point, slowing down cautiously. The sea of bodies had grown thicker, which meant I had to act nimbly, gingerly making my way past the haphazard body parts. I took note of the carnage and, with a small amount of satisfaction, noticed that some demonic shifters had been taken down as well, even if their bodies were few and far between. Whoever was controlling the demons, if indeed it was the circle, as cruel and cunning as they may be, would be counting casualties tonight as well. I tried to stick to the plan I had made with my alpha, keeping to the tree line, but every so often there were a few what looked to be purposefully fouled trees blocking my path, too big for me to jump and too long to go around, forcing me to either go deeper into the forest, which meant that midnight had a chance to kill a demon or two, or further out in the open, making us a prime target for an ambush. I then continued my way into the city, deeper into the city, after I was, once again, forced to leave the safety of the trees. The rotten stench of death was even worse here, and it felt like it had wormed its way into my pores, shoved its way down my throat, and seeped into my bones. I released a small growl of disgust and moved quickly on before the alpha could throw a fit at me for being late. I also think that old wolf really needs to loosen up and get laid, Midnight chuckled as he caught onto my line of thought. Having another being occupy your mind at the same time you do can often feel crowded, not to mention complicated from the clash of personalities. I rolled my eyes. I skidded to a halt as I reached my destination, narrowly avoiding crashing into a decapitated cadaver. Hanging by his feet from the lowest tree branch, blocking my way to the side gate of the Royal Silesian mansion. I had to belly crawl under the beheaded vampire to avoid touching him and getting more gore on our fur. As I came to a stand, I found some scattered remains of the Royal Silesian Guard. They were lying between me and the wall. Their chest cavities were gaping open, and I saw that their flesh had been burnt to a crisp, as though a fire had consumed their hearts from the inside. It was the only way to kill them, aside from silver poisoning, the smell of which still hung thickly in the air. Thankfully, breathing it in or having it touch my skin wouldn't hurt me. Many hunters had tried killing us wolves with silver, but the only thing they got in return was a torn jugular before being gutted. Looking at the wall before me, I turned and shifted back into my human form. As much as a wolf shifter can do many things, we can't scale stone walls with 4 paws. I didn't spare another glance at the guards as I climbed to the top of the wall before jumping down and landing on the lawn below me with a soft thud. That's where I found the rest of the royal guard littering the front lawn. I averted my stare from their glassy eyes and looked around, my mouth agape. The proud Silesian mansion, once full of lead-light windows, bright lights, and white walls, now looked in a state of disrepair. The windows were all shattered, some hideously decorated with impaled vampires, guards, and humans. The front door looked like a wave of the dead had burst from it, pouring out over the porch and down the steps. Were all these people living here? The king's staff, perhaps? I wondered. Midnight didn't reply, but was pacing back and forth in the back of my mind in agitation. A restless spirit was he. I shuddered at the cold breeze caressing my face and wished I had grabbed some clothing as I picked my way over the dead bodies and over the bodies and up the grand staircase. Werewolves didn't have the ability to shift without tearing their clothes, and unfortunately my clothes were back at the border, the shared border between Silesia, the Pinewood Forest, and Abyssinia, where my pack, the Blood Moon, was located. There were a couple of more territories further north of Silesia, Veneta, and Vi, if I remembered correctly. They were demonic lands, and hardly anyone went there. If they did, they sometimes never came back, and we never heard from them again. The Blood Moon pack had grown over the years, and it was so big that the Alpha had to split it into smaller packs, called Beta packs. There were 2 of them so far. The Silver Moon pack, which was headed by a seasoned Beta warrior, and was the second largest after ours. Then came the Black Sea pack, a coastal pack headed by another warrior. They had the largest number of Svalbandjuri and worked the closest with the farmers of the Silesian court, as well as other farmers around the surrounding cities and towns. They all reported back to Alpha Sterling once a month, though. I knew that the Svalbandjuri liked to live near bodies of water, no matter what type of water it was, from lakes to streams and rivers to the sea. They were able to make fresh water from the sea or contaminated water. They could fish without having to cast nets, and some rumors even had them in constant contact with the sea life, but I have no idea how true that was. While they being the collaborators, were working on a solution for that particular issue, I would have to find some clean clothes inside the mansion or steal them off a dead body. I shuddered at the thought of wearing a dead man's pants, but shuddered more at the thought of being stark naked in front of a king and queen. To be honest, I kind of wish they would hurry up and find an answer to the issue. The collaborators were a network of beings who worked on scientific and technological breakthroughs. Species including the Bandjuri, using magic to weave the cloth, shifters, testing if the cloth would tear when transformed, and the human military, distributing it throughout their ranks, which included some wolves, as we were stronger, faster, and more resilient to bullets than humans. Not to mention our healing abilities gave us a keen advantage. Not every wolf shifter entered the military, though. Many often preferring to stay with their families and their packs. Once I had cleared the ground of the massive house, Once I'd cleared the ground floor of the massive house, wary to ensure no demons were hiding and no corpses moved, I headed towards the stairs leading to the first level. I took a deep breath through my nose as I ascended, focusing on the alpha's scent, faint and stale among the others. Even in my human form, my senses were enhanced. My sense of smell 100 times better than any human and some other paranormal races. I quickly put on a pair of pants and tugged on the shirt I had found tucked in the back of a closet I had peeked in while searching the rooms I had passed for any survivors or enemies. The fit was small, but I was dressed regardless. I barely stopped as I made my way down the wide hallway, careful not to trip over a leg here, a torso there, or to slip on the floor, which was slick with blood. My feet soon grew sticky as bodily fluids and gore squished between my toes. It was enough to make my stomach start to roll. I hurried down the long hallway to another staircase at the end and took the steps 2 at a time before finally coming to a halt at the start of a short corridor. Seeing the light spilling out from underneath the single heavy oak door, I pushed it open slightly, cringing at the small squeak the hinges made. I lifted my hand to my eyes. And blinked against the sudden brightness of the room. There had been no moon tonight, so most of my travels had been trudging through thick patches of utter darkness, and the mansion had been swathed in darkness, all the candles and chandeliers evidently extinguished before my arrival. Outside, the sky was bleak. It was trying to rain without much success. The signs of a spring storm were on its way too, the dark, rolling clouds providing the perfect environment for the demons. So coming to a room that was brightly lit, even though it was just by candles, was jarring. I shut the door and took in the small room. The walls were almost bare of any warmth. White plain walls, carpet, and drapes covering the interior. Any possessions left behind could have been possibly sacked when the demons came through. Or maybe it was supposed to be like that, and the king and queen were using it as a panic room. The window was large enough to see out of and to open, but small enough to defend. A large fireplace stood on one wall, cold, while another held a big bed, enough for 3 people to sleep beside each other comfortably. I brought my attention back to a man standing in the center, who must have been the Silesian king. After a momentary pause at my entrance, he had returned to a deep discussion with my alpha. This might be my first time officially meeting him, but there wasn't a paranormal who didn't know who he was. The king of vampires was a striking figure, with shoulder-length black hair, bright blue eyes, and tan skin, standing at least as tall as my alpha, but twice as wide. His button-up sleeves exposing well-defined muscles. He was sitting on the bed while a woman... No, he wasn't sitting on the bed. We'll ignore that. A woman, who must have been the queen, paced between him and my alpha. A worried expression creased her petite features. She was a tiny thing, standing about 5'4", and had she been standing but beside her husband, she probably would have come up to his chest. She had long, waist-length, cinnamon-coloured hair and amber eyes contrasting prettily against her creamy skin. "Ah, Nox, you finally made it," my alpha boomed, keeping his back to me, which surprised me until I realized that only he and I knew about this room, and he would have heard the squeak of the door hinges before I even entered. He also would have smelt me coming down the hall, since I stunk to the high heavens of death. His hands were tense. He was nervous. Something very uncommon for any alpha, as they were usually so sure of themselves and radiated confidence. Although I guess in war that confidence took a hit. His voice was deep, but it held no malice or accusation as he flicked his hands towards the other two people in the room. "Nox, this is Hunter and niece Riviera, the Silesian king and queen. Anise, the queen to the Banduri covenants, and through their mateship, the queen of vampires." He paused. "This is Nox Swaver, one of my top beta warriors at Blood Moon." I inclined my head and bowed respectfully as they raised their eyebrows. I got it. It was amazing to be considered the top of anything at 16, but I was unable to open my mouth to speak for fear of screaming or vomiting from the stench around me. I was relieved that they either didn't expect me to speak or didn't want me to. Hunter moved over to the bed after planting a kiss on the side of Anise's head, stilling her pacing for only a moment. I hadn't even paid much attention to the bed before he sat down and pulled something pale and small into his tanned hand. When I did look, there was only a small lump under the covers. I could see what appeared to be long, almost blood-red hair spilling out from behind Hunter. Whatever was under the covers had to be their daughter. The vague shape intrigued Midnight. I noted that Hunter was constantly throwing worried looks between his mate and the little lump in the bed. The Silesian king was clearly nervous. I tried to shuffle closer to get a better look when Anise suddenly stopped pacing. I noticed a cordless phone in her hand and a frustrated look on her face. "Damn it, he answered the damn phone before and now he's not," she yelled, throwing the phone away with a growl. Hunter captured her hand, spinning her around to look back at him. It was clear they were talking about something telepathically before she spoke again, looking at my alpha. "You have to hide her, Sterling," she stated pleadingly, her voice cracking. Who are they talking about? I wondered before looking toward the bed again, where the lump moved and let out a small sigh. Now I was curious. "We won't be able to take her with us. We've tried everything and everyone else. Even Mother said that the roads were still too dangerous. If anything happened to her," Anise trailed off and sniffled back a sob, tears making tracks down her slightly bloodied face. Alpha Sterling looked between the man and the woman, torn. I'd never seen my Alpha look quite as heartbroken as he did now. The lump squirmed again. The child must be waking up. I didn't even notice the look that Alpha gave me out of the corner of his eye, or the way the corners of his lips turned down slightly. He turned back to the queen. "Where, Anise? Where am I meant to hide her? She's not a wolf. She's a Silesian princess. She'll only stick out in the pack," he added gently, as another sob rose from Anise. Hunter gently rubbed her back. "You have that cabin, right?" Hunter finally spoke up, his voice thick like rich wine. The Alpha sighed and nodded. "You can use that, can't you?" he asked again as the niece continued to sob. She'll be isolated from the main pack house, Hunter, Alpha Sterling conceded, slowly losing the battle. I watched as the lump moved quickly. She sat up. It was as if I was in a trance, all the air in my lungs rushing out as I watched with a mixture of awe and fascination as her hand poked out of the blankets that had pulled in her lap and affixed itself to Hunter's sleeve, giving it a tug for his attention. Hunter looked down and chuckled. She appeared about 10 years old, her russet hair sticking up in all directions, the soft light of the candle making it seem lighter in colour than it was. She pushed her hair out of her face with both tiny hands, her bright green eyes wide as she regarded first Alpha Sterling, then myself. Hello, Alexia, Hunter said softly, like he was speaking to a spooked animal, still smiling down at the child and patting her head. We have guests. Why don't you say hello? He looked back up as he continued, and while that might be true, Sterling, I know she'll be safe with you and your pups. He gave us a pointed look. Alexia looked at her father before turning her wide-eyed gaze back to Sterling. But we are werewolves, and you're both the bloody king and queen of vampires and Banjuri. How are we going to raise a vampiric princess? A hybrid, no less. How do you think it would look if your daughter just suddenly disappeared? The pack probably won't accept her anyway. Alpha Sterling was almost shouting at this point. That's bullshit. You know they will, especially the she-wolves. You know they love their pups. They'll treat her like one of their own. We can also bring in Banjuri teachers, and I know your pack has a great educational system. Also, while we may not be able to see her all the time, we'll be able to call her often. She'll have a phone and she'll have internet too. She needs protection against the circle. You know that none of the lords are above using a child to meet the end goal. Anise spat with venom. My Alpha just shook his head in defeat. There is no arguing with the Silesian king and queen. A vampiric Banjuri hybrid, huh? Would it be so wrong if we were to protect her? She's going to hold a lot of power, especially once trained, Midnight mused from the back of my mind. This child had piqued his interest, and she had mine too. It could start another war. I have a feeling that no matter what we do, it won't be enough, I responded, still listening to the leader's conversation. Midnight huffed and curled up in the back of my mind as a good wolf's spirit should. I glanced back at the child as she watched me with those wide, bright green eyes. It was as if she was looking into my soul. Most werewolves would take this as a threat, and I half expected Midnight to push through growling, flooding the room with his powerful aura and forcing the child to submit. That lazy animal only stirred beneath her gaze, however, pushing his way to the surface in curiosity, but not quite breaking through. I knew she saw my eyes change colour from emerald to silver at the stirring of my wolf spirit, when she let out a tiny gasp. Her eyes widened slightly as my own changed back to their normal colour, blinking slowly as Midnight receded. She copied me, blinking back. I crouched down and moved slowly forward to get a better look at her eyes, noticing the golden flecks in her irises. I watched with fascination as they shifted from golden hazel to black. Mesmerized, they began to swirl with a whirlpool of colours. Impossible. Breaking off the connection, she turned her gaze from mine to look up at her father, yawning. Despite being only 10 at most, compared to most vampire vampires and wolves, whose pups and offspring were twice her size, she was a tiny thing. Her protectors, huh? I wondered. How do you do? She said in a small voice, looking back towards us and sitting up some more. She offered her hand with a smile, peeking over her small bottom lip were a pair of fangs. My eyes widened. She definitely was a hybrid. But I felt there was something more to her abilities. Her voice sounded as small and shy as she appeared. Not a bad thing, right? Midnight spoke from the back of my mind, answering the rhetorical question I had mused earlier. I shook my head. Hunter beamed with pride, and Anise affectionately tugged one of Alexia's curls. I reached out and took her small hand in mine without thinking. As soon as our hands connected, her eyes changed to black before rolling back into her head. I heard both her parents gasp. Instantly, it felt like I had just jammed my hand and arm into a pile of needles. My vision blurred, and darkness enveloped me as the prickly sensation started taking over the rest of my body, like a million small knives poking at my nerve endings simultaneously. I tried to pull my hand away, but, for a child, her grip was incredibly strong. Midnight whined in my head as wave after wave of agony rolled through me. Then came the images, like watching a movie on fast forward, filling my head with so many different scenes, smells, and emotions, all slamming into me at once. I felt myself fall to the floor, howling in pain. My head felt like it was being split in two by an axe. Midnight was also howling in pain, but it sounded like a distant echo. I was almost hyperventilating, on the verge of a panic attack, when suddenly it all stopped. I flopped onto my back, groaning in pain and panting. Sweat trickled down my neck and back as I tried to focus on the ceiling to stop myself from blacking out. Anise settled her gaze on me, eyes slowly widening in understanding. I was glad someone seemed to know what was going on, because I had no fucking clue. Sterling, you have to take her, Anise said firmly, turning her gaze up at him and then back to me. Worry gnawed at my gut, at her change of tone. I snapped my attention between her and my alpha. I managed to shakily pick myself up off the floor. Everyone was watching me, one perplexed, one looking smug with a hint of worry on her face. Hunter, meanwhile, was looking at me with an odd expression on his face, almost gleeful, although I swear I saw his eyes narrow and darken for just a moment, but it passed so quickly before he was beaming wildly to Alpha Sterling and his mate. I heard a small intake of breath and looked back at Alexia, who had beads of sweat forming on her forehead. Looking out of breath as I did, she seemed uncomfortable. She then pointed to me, and, without warning, I shifted into my wolf. She let out a small squeal of delight and held out her hands as I trotted over to her, bowing my head for her to touch. She gently patted me, scratching behind my ears. I sat in front of her like a huge puppy, my tail wagging a little from side to side, tongue lolling. I was shocked. How could someone so tiny force me to submit and shift? I had no control over my reactions. She called to me and asked me to show myself. She wanted to see what I looked like, Midnight said with a hint of smugness, even though he was as shocked as I was. Like, she talked to you? That wasn't... No, that shouldn't be possible. The only people who could communicate with Midnight was myself and my Pact's wolves, if they needed to hear him, and if he chose for them to. He didn't answer me though, only wagging his tail even harder. Hunter and Anise reached over and stroked my fur warmly. Midnight, being the attention whore he was, lapped it up. But when he went to lay down and tried to roll onto his back and show his soft belly, I held firm, nipping that thought in the bud before he could embarrass me any more in front of the royal family and my alpha. He huffed and I rolled my eyes internally. Although I'm not sure Sterling will have much of a choice now. Not now that these two can't be separated, Anise said softly. Yes, my love, you are right, Hunter replied with a smirk in Sterling's direction, wrapping his free arm around her waist. And why don't I get much of a choice? Sterling demanded, glancing between the couple and me irritably. Alexia continued to stare at me and rub my ears, although the longer she stared into my eyes, the more like my mind felt like it was being pulled forward through thick honey. There was no other way to explain the experience. Anise looked at Alpha Sterling straight in the eyes before she stated in a triumphant whisper, "They've become intertwined. You can't separate them now."